Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the high-level panel on women and girls in digitalization. If you are here because this is the panel that you are expecting, you are most welcome. If you are here because you've made a mistake in the room, you're going to want to stay. This is going to be a very exciting panel with very high-level and concrete interventions from several of our She Is We heroes. So welcome, and we look forward to the next hour and a half of a conversation together. My name is Sacha Rubel. I am program specialist in the communication and information sector of UNESCO. And I'd like to thank DG Connect and most specifically Lars-Erik Forsberg and Gérard Gallet for their invitation to be here to highlight the work that is going on around the world in support of putting women and girls at the forefront of digitalization. The theme of this panel will address a very concrete question, which is how can digitalization empower women and girls in the digital economy and society, and how can we close the digital gap? As many of you know, women's full participation in the tech sector would provide a boost to the economy and allow for diversity in the ongoing digital transformation process. More women in the digital jobs market could create an annual 16 billion GDP boost in the European Union alone. The trend, however, in women's participation in the digital sector differs between countries, but globally, the gender gap is in fact widening. This calls for strong change at all levels of policies and of programs and of development cooperation. This panel has brought together industry representatives, policymakers, and stakeholders from across the globe, some who have in fact flown in just for today to fly back tonight. And they will address this issue and share their experiences, lessons learned, and provide input on how to ensure gender equality in the ICT sector. It will also provide a space, and we hope very actively with contributions from you in the audience, to discuss good practices and see how knowledge can be shared and applied between the European Union and developing countries. Finally, we will also debate how digital, more broadly, can empower women and girls in the society. The objectives of this panel are threefold. One is to underline the potential of ICTs to create jobs for young people and empower women. The second is to highlight the risks and underline also concrete solutions to address the gender-digital divide. And the third is to share lessons with the wealth of experience from the people who are here on this panel on initiatives on gender equality within the digital sector, in the European Union, and elsewhere. For the next hour and a half that we will be together, the panel will be separated into three sequences, focusing on these three sections, and we hope that we will have the opportunity after the interventions of the panelists to hear from you to encourage another larger discussion for each of the sections. I'd like to acknowledge first and foremost the presence also of our Assistant Director General of UNESCO, Edouard Firmin-Matoko, who is here with us today and is also a constant supporter of the work that UNESCO is doing more broadly to support gender mainstreaming and ICTs in Africa and around the globe. So thank you for being with us today and supporting this panel. I'd like to introduce very briefly, before passing the floor to our chair of the panel, the panelists who will be speaking with us today. First, we have Mr. Alexander De Croo, who is Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Development Cooperation, Digital Agenda, Telecom and Postal Services of Belgium. Mr. De Croo will have to leave around 3:30, but I know his infamous capacity to inspire in very brief amounts of time, so I have no doubt in 1 hour it will be as if we have had 3 hours of incredible information of the work that is being done in Belgium to support a digital transformation. We have also with us today Ms. Shwetal Shah, who is a young leader from India based in the UK and is 26 years old and has done more with her life than I have in a little bit more than 26 years. So she has become, since this morning, one of my sheroes, and I look forward very much to highlighting some of the incredible experience that she has in working in the ICT sector in the UK and around the world. We have with us also today Mrs. Doreen Bogdan-Martin, who is Chief of Strategic Planning at the ITU and Chief of Strategic Planning and Membership Department and co-chair of the Equals Steering Committee. Equals is a crucial initiative to promote women at the forefront of the ICT sector, and thank you for being with us here today to talk about that work. We have also Ms. Karin Jämtin, Director General of the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA, from Sweden, who is again a large supporter of the work in putting gender equality and women at the forefront of digitalization. Thank you for being with us today. We have Ms. Laura Borisova, who is the head of cabinet of Ms. Maria Gabriel, who is the member of the European Commission responsible for the digital economy and society. Ms. Gabriel cannot be with us today, although she is here in spirit through Ms. Borisova, because they are currently setting the next 7-year financial framework. So that is very good news, because in the framework of this panel, we will be providing concrete recommendations and solutions. And in parallel, Ms. Gabriel, I'm sure, is in the process of allocating the necessary finances in order to support digitization and gender equality in the cooperation framework of the European Commission. We have also Ms. Anusha Raman Khan, Federal Minister for IT and Telecom of Pakistan and member of the UN Broadband Commission. Thank you for being with us here today. You have had a long flight here and you will fly back later today, and I think it is representative of how committed you are to promoting women in the ICT sector. Thank you for being with us. We hope you have taken advantage of the very good Belgian coffee in the hallway, and we are sure that you will inspire us with your concrete examples of the wonderful work you've been doing in Pakistan. We have also with us today Ms. Latifa Salisu Hassan from Niger, who is winner of the Miss Geek Africa 2018 and CEO of Innovel Niger, and we will hear from her some of the amazing work that she's doing on the ground. One of the initiatives of this panel is not only to put women at the forefront, but specifically also young girls, and I'm very happy that on this panel we have these two very dynamic women to talk with us about the work that they have been doing. We also have with us today Mr. Joachim Reider, who is the Vodafone Group External Affairs Director at Vodafone, but comes to us today with a vast experience both in national government and the UN, and we look forward to hearing from you about the importance of multi-stakeholder support to centralizing women and girls in the ICT sector. Without further ado, I will pass the floor to Ms. Laura Borisova, head of the cabinet, to deliver on behalf of Commissioner Gabriel the keynote speech of this panel. Ms. Borisova.
Deputy Prime Minister De Croo, dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen, indeed, my Commissioner would have loved to be with you today. She believes in this cause. She's indeed with us in spirit. It's a very important day also within the European Commission. Last night we also achieved a quite significant political agreement on the Code of Electronic Communications. Hence, allow me indeed to deliver this speech on her behalf. And as I said, that's one of the greatest causes that we have been defending since the beginning of the mandate of the Commissioner. It's indeed a great honor, a great pleasure to be here today with you in the framework of these European Development Days. We strongly believe that by working together, by sharing our experiences, by identifying common problems and also by proposing common solutions, we'll move forward on this very fundamental issue, role of women and girls in digitalization. Gender equality is not just a moral duty, is not just a social justice issue. There are more and more indications that it is a powerful driver for peace, for security, for development. It can help prevent radicalization, facilitate the processes of state building and reconstruction after civil wars. The European Union is indeed firmly committed to advancing the gender equality in the context of the United Nations 2030 Agenda and its Sustainable Development Goals. Indeed, we have constantly reiterated and reaffirmed that gender equality is an essential part of our foreign policy in the global strategy that was presented in June last year. Because yes, we believe our future is digital. There is certainly no doubt about that in our minds. The digital transformation of our economies, the digital transformation of our societies, and our way of living is an immense source of opportunities that we cannot afford to miss. Not the European Union, not the African countries, representatives, not anyone. However, this is exactly where we are heading. We are probably missing this enormous pool of untapped potential for digitalization that are women. Women's underrepresentation today means women's exclusion in a future that will be predominantly digital. Indeed, our moderator mentioned a couple of figures that I will try not to repeat. However, you've certainly seen the European Commission study, Women in the Digital Era, that we published 8th of March this year. The percentage of girls and women studying or working in the information and communication technology sector is clearly, and I would even say dramatically, decreasing. Out of every 1,000 women with tertiary education, only 24 graduate in ICT-related fields, of which only 6 go on to work in digital jobs. This is actually 6 times less than men. Less than 1% of graduated women end up in digital technology jobs. Less than 1%. This is a very important problem for us to tackle, because our study has also shown that women's digital startups are more likely to succeed than their male counterparts. Unfortunately, too few investors invest in women-owned startups, and I'm pretty sure this is going to come back as something to discuss during the panel. To this, we can add also some additional figures. According to Eurostat, Europe is experiencing a shortage of ICT specialists with about 350,000 vacancies. 40% of the companies trying to recruit computer scientists also report difficulties. You must know that in a recent also Microsoft study, many of you probably have seen it, it reveals that girls do not want to study science, technology, engineer, or mathematics, although they are all aware of the attractions of these areas for the future job market. The lack of female role models, and I'll come back to that, is one of the explanations for this day. Allow me to be very clear. The result is a very blunt digital divide between men and women at a time of unprecedented digital transformation that we need to succeed. We cannot in Europe, but also elsewhere, afford to miss these opportunities. More women in digital jobs could generate, indeed, a yearly increase to European GDP of 16 billion euros, a figure that was mentioned in your introduction, moderator. So what are we waiting for in order to act? And what do we do in order to incentivize girls to study STEM, to push and further support women's digital entrepreneurship, to overcome this digital divide I just referred to? Our answer is a multi-sectorial approach that attacks the deep, complex, and transversal causes of the gender gap in order to empower women to play a more active role in our digital economy and society. We combine political actions, but we also combine very concrete projects. And this is why my commissioner has launched a strategy on women and digital, again, on the 8th of March, with 3 pillars. I will very briefly go through those 3 pillars. The first is how to fight stereotypes. While our society is indeed diverse by essence, these stereotypes reflect a wrong representation of it. And this is not acceptable. In this sense, we launched the initiative No Women, No Panel campaign. This means that my commissioner would not take part to any public events in which she would be the only female speaker or where women would not be fairly represented. This initiative is actually warmly supported by a number of European commissioners, dozens of members of the European Parliament, and many, many civil society organizations. I invite you all to join this campaign and to be ambassadors for more equality in panels and public events. Secondly, the issue of skills, digital skills, and to some extent more advanced skills, which would be instrumental for women to strive in this digital age. There again, we have a study that was recently published by Accenture that shows that women, on average, lack of basic skills such as coding. Indeed, they only represent 10% of one of the biggest international online coding communities. And would you know what would be the reason for this? We are convinced that girls and women underestimate their abilities, their capacities, their interests. No one tells them that digital skills are important for their future and that coding or programming is simply not only for boys. And this is again one of the reasons why we are committed to support and promote what we call in the European Union the EU Code Week. Normally takes place in October, to bring the girls and the associations together and show them that the digital world is open and is inclusive. And in this regard, the achievements of the Africa Code Week are absolutely remarkable, with 46% of women participating in this Africa Code Week. Not only that, but it's also actively supported by key partners from the private and the public sector, and it has already benefited 1.8 million young Africans. Further, our action does not only concern education, but also the insertion into the work life. To do so, we support stakeholders' partnerships, online platforms, which train female entrepreneurs and connect them with senior female entrepreneurs acting as, I was referring to that before, role models and mentors. The Digital Skills and Job Coalition initiative was a very fertile ground in this regard. Indeed, again, going back to other study, it shows that only 23%, 0.4 of the entrepreneurs in the ICT sector are women in Europe. However, despite the scarce percentage of women in entrepreneurship, research also shows that female-owned digital startups are most likely to succeed, to be more successful than those of their female counterparts. And that investment in female-founded startup performs 63% better than exclusively male-founded startups. We also believe in the visibility of the good practices, and that will be one of my last points. Through the European Digital Skills Awards, we aim to showcase initiatives that develop the digital skills of ICT specialists, as well as children in school and people at work in life in general. Last year, and in order to highlight the importance of closing this gender gap in digital skills, my commissioner introduced a special prize to a project that promoted digital skills of women and girls. The winning project, we called it IT for She, has a mentoring program for young women who study STEM, a boot camp for the best 130 female STEM students, as well as an outreach program teaching young girls in rural areas how to code, tinker with hardware, and discover 3D printing. Actions like the one I've just described are crucial to come to terms with gender gap in the tech area. I would like also to turn the spotlight on a key condition for the success of our actions, that is acting together, acting all together. We have no choice but to listen to each other, to get out of our comfort zone, to build the best solution in our common interest. Let me again be very clear here. Advancing women's rights is not at all a women matter. It should be everyone's business. Men and women, public and private, parents, teachers, policymakers, all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, the main issue still is whether there is a will, political will, to do something to reverse the situation, or if we are going to stay in the margins and watch how women are girls are excluded from this digital transformation exercise that we are experiencing. Digitization offers a variety of opportunities for female empowerment and for a more equal female participation in labor markets, in financial markets, in entrepreneurship. We really need to take action and commit to overcome all these barriers preventing the full economic and social participation of women in this digital, I'll call it here, revolution. Thanks again for the invitation to this panel, and I'm looking forward to a very interactive and interesting discussion and questions from all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Madame Borisova. I think your speech is a perfect introduction both to the overall theme of the panel, but also the first sequence, which really is focused on the potential of ICTs to create jobs for young people and empower women. The statistics that you underline from the Women in the Digital Age study mark very clearly the growing gap, unfortunately, and the need to really centralize women, both to empower them with digital skills, but also to empower them economically. My first question in the framework of the first sequence is to Mr. Alexander de Croo. The Digital for Development platform was launched in Belgium in September 2017 with a focus to bring all actors of development together by creating and facilitating an ecosystem for all stakeholders, existing projects and opportunities using digital in development cooperation. The ultimate goal is to build a bridge between the Belgian private sector and the development sector in realizing the Sustainable Development Goals. As Minister of Development Cooperation, Digital Agenda, Telecom and Postal Services of Belgium, what do you see concretely as the main barriers, and what actions are you taking to ensure that more youth, women and girls are involved in the ICT sector through this platform?
Thank you for explaining what our Digital for Development platform is. That way I don't have to do it myself anymore. But the idea really was to bring everyone together, and from the private sector, and from civil society, and from government, on trying to go beyond what we have done, I think, quite well over the last years, is talk about digital for development. And this is a topic that on the Belgian side we have pushed a lot, because we really see it as one of the more important vectors for development in the world today, is integrating technology, data, skills, and so on. Because we see that throughout the world, it's an incredible facilitator in lowering the threshold for people to get access to a number of things. Information, definitely. Participation, definitely, but also entrepreneurship. It's never been easier to be an entrepreneur than thanks to digital business models. Now, this platform has done a number of things. One of them is to manage a call for proposal. We are launching different calls for proposals in total for 20 million euros, which are looking at partners to better integrate, especially women, in digital development. This is one thing, but also it has been good at showing that in this domain, we call it digital for development, it is really a two-way street. It used to be that globalization was more or less defined as we develop things and then the rest of the world will consume it. That is changing. In a number of domains, really the frontier of development is not the Western world. If we talk about mobile money, those places in the world where it really makes a difference today, it's Kenya, it's Bangladesh, it's definitely not Western Europe or North America. The same in distant healthcare. I mean, we see that the real innovation is taking place in other places, and it really shows that we are getting into a multipolar world, and globalization is not a one-way street anymore. It's really become a two-way street. And one of the things we did to demonstrate that was the typical trade missions that you do. We did it for the first time in Kenya with Belgian startups. And it's a totally different dynamic. I mean, this is mixing Belgian startups with something which is now called the Silicon Savannah, which is a startup community around Nairobi, and really learning from each other what the possibilities are and how business models that are being developed there under the constraints that are there, how can they be used here in Europe and vice versa. It really gives the opportunity to develop solutions locally which fit with the local needs. And this is a big shift compared to the traditional development view where, I mean, we kind of need to look at our solutions developed here and then try to export them there. No, this is being built up from the start. Now, one of the things we have in common is that we are everywhere in need for digital talent. I mean, the digital skills gap is as wide here in Western Europe as it is in our partner countries. Very easy. There is in the world today approximately 20 million people who know how to code. If you know that there is such a shortage, then why would you exclude half of the world population being women? I mean, why would we continue let this gap widen? Because actually the gap is actually widening today. Why, if you have to look for people, why would you only focus on the male side of the population? So anything that helps in what I would call de-geeking or de-nerdifying ICT helps. And this is a key element. I mean, in the 60s, the three innovators in ICT in general were women. The ICT world at the start was something where women was a world where women had a lot of influence. It changed due to a number of things, and one of these things is personal computing and so on, which made it a bit more geeky, which was more appealing to a 16-year-old boy than to a 16-year-old girl. But we can change that. And there's a number of techniques that you could use to make it appealing to a 16-year-old girl. We are now in a situation, we are in blatant need for people, and we're in blatant need for people who can transform ICT into something for everyone. So we're actually open for ideas. If you have ideas on how to do this, look up the Belgian D4D platform, Digital for Development platform, and please participate in one of our calls for proposal because we have budget available and we are looking for great ideas.
Thank you very much for that intervention and also for highlighting the need to perhaps review the way in which the history of the ICT sector is told and put women at the forefront of this history telling. You also underlined very clearly the need for local solutions to local challenges, which is indeed this approach of self-determined development also in the ICT sector at the heart of a lot of the work that the stakeholders on this panel are doing. My next question is to Karin Jamtin. Can you tell us a little bit about the initiatives SIDA, as a development cooperation agency, is supporting to ensure ICTs are fully harnessed to empower women and girls, and your views as DG of SIDA on how to harness this potential most effectively through, for example, support to digital literacy and digital skills initiatives?
We are supporting many such skills, but I would like to start off by emphasizing what has partly already been said, and that is to reach the SDGs, we have to use the force of digitalization, but to avoid that 50% of the population falls behind, we have to recognize that the same kinds of norms will be a hindrance also when rolling out digitalization. That is maybe evident when looking at the widening digital gap in many countries, but also when getting reports from the field that in some areas where we are supporting the rolling out of these banking systems or that the minister spoke about before, one can see that the woman in the household has less access to the mobile as such. It's a very, very practical work then to work with the norms and to work with the norms so that the women has the same access to whatever device is needed to actually access the digital thing in this sector in different ways. We support establishments of small businesses. We support different kinds of education and training settings in all parts of the world. And we try to link different kinds of activities to each other. In parts of the African continent, we support electrification. And one can see that a spin-off from the electrification is the possibility of creating small businesses. Then it can be a small business that is actually placed in a home, meaning that it's easier for a woman to actually be the head of the small business. It can be a business to charge for charging a phone or something like that. So we are trying to link up different kinds of tools in rolling out digitalization in many parts of the world. But we are also supporting norm setting for us of different kinds to strengthen participation of women. And I would just like to mention some. We have supported development of feminist principles of the internet through our partner organization, Association for Progressive Communications. We have supported women's rights online to create a policy with women and for women at norm-setting levels. But we're also supporting others to work with gender, digitalization, and reaching the SDGs from sort of a global as well as from a local level.
Thank you very much for that overview of the work that you're doing both at the policy level and also on the programmatic level on the ground around the world. Ma prochaine question est dirigée.
My next question is for Latifa Suli Hassan. I'm very happy that she is here with us today. She is one of the young, dynamic women from Africa in the IT sector. You were recognized as Miss Geek Africa in Kigali recently because you created an application that allowed you to reduce intervention time for emergency services in accidents, and it allowed populations to give first aid while waiting for the emergency services to arrive. That reflects what Mr. De Cruz said as to local solutions to local problems. This Miss Geek competition encourages young women to really take things in hand and in order to meet the challenges of the continent. Could you maybe talk about your own experience? Could you talk about how your work ethic allowed you to work in IT and how to become economically independent? Thank you. I come from Niger. As you've said, I am Miss Geek Africa 2018. First of all, I'm a student. I study software. I have to say that I've been dealing with this. I'm actually doing for about 3 years. I'm doing a master's at the moment. Now, after my school, I didn't originally want to go into IT. I actually wanted to do medicine. But somebody told me, no, technology is the future. And it was suggested that I would actually go and do IT. Now, I wasn't initially convinced, but I did the first year. And during the first year, I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was fascinating not just because, well, now there were 40 people, of which only 5 were women. And I really liked the challenge. Often the men in the class said, no, you're a girl, what are you doing here? But it was really the challenge that inspired me. I wanted to show them that, yes, a woman can actually have a career in IT. And so that's really where I dove in. And recently I set up a startup. So you spoke about the project that I came up with. Beyond that, I also participated in a national competition in Niger. The idea of this competition was to come up with the best IT projects in Niger, and there were 200 candidates. 23.3% of these projects were from women, and I actually won this competition. So that's just another way of showing that, yes, when women get involved, you actually have results, positive results. But we need to encourage women. It's not a question of teaching us. No, you should get us to like this. You should invite us to be passionate about this. Now, there are women who start in IT and then give up. It's because you're just teaching them. You're not actually stoking passion. Thank you very much for that overview.
Intervention also reflects very clearly the need, as Mr. Ducroux underlined, to de-geekify women in the ICT sector. And it makes me think also of a comment from a young Senegalese coder who said, well, I thought I was going to do fashion design, and then I realized that actually coding and developing mobile apps is just as creative as going into fashion design. So there's this kind of need to reframe the way in which we think about the scope of the ICT sector and STEM and how it contributes to local communities. So thank you for highlighting your experience in that regard. My next question is to Doreen Bogdan-Martin. The ITU is a UN specialized agency working to harness information and communication technology for development. How can we make, in your opinion, sure that ICTs are used effectively to achieve all the UN Sustainable Development Goals, including achieving gender equality, goal number 5?
Thank you so much, Sasha, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really a great pleasure for me to be here and be amongst such a distinguished group of panelists, and it's hard to follow Latifa. I think if we had more Latifas, we'd actually be able to attract more women and girls to the tech sector, so really congratulations. I think that the potential and the promise of connectivity is quite evident here throughout the halls of this conference room, of this facility. And when we think about the 2030 agenda and the 17 development goals, I wanted to just refer to the preamble of the 2030 agenda, which actually notes the spread of information and communication technologies and global interconnectedness and the great potential that holds for human progress. And I really do believe that there is great potential for human progress. But that human progress will never be achieved if we have such a big gap. We have seen mobile vastly spread throughout the planet. Everything is digital, yet half of the world is still unconnected. And that's really a big problem when we think about the Sustainable Development Goals, and specifically SDG 5, on gender equality. And if we don't succeed in closing the digital gender gap, we will have difficulty not only in achieving SDG 5, but actually in achieving each and every one of the Sustainable Development Goals. For us, I mean, connectivity provides a voice to the voiceless. It provides a means for economic empowerment, social empowerment, political empowerment. The opportunities are vast, as I said, outside of this conference room. We see the applications in terms of health, agriculture, digital financial inclusion, and access to markets as well. So the opportunities and the potential are really tremendous, but we need to zoom in on ways that we can really close that gap. And it's about achieving universal and affordable access to all, and making sure that everybody has, as the Deputy Prime Minister alluded to, those necessary digital skills to take advantage of that access. Specifically on the job side, again, if we had more Latifas, I think we would attract more women and girls to the sector. One thing that we have done, and the European Union members have been very active, is to celebrate Girls in ICT Day. We actually had a celebration here in this conference center some years ago. And it is about attracting girls to careers in the tech sector. You've alluded to some of the figures yourself, as did our keynote speaker, but the figures are really bad and they're getting worse. And I think globally in the tech workforce, we only have about 17% women's representation. And of course, that is then reflected when we look at leadership levels. And if we look around at ministers, Minister Khan is one of our few female ministers in the world. We only have about 10% of female ministers in the world, and less when we look at independent regulators. So I really think we do have a lot of work to do. It makes economic sense. It's good for the world. It's good for all of us. So let's close the gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. As you said, there's a very common saying that says you can't be what you can't see. And it's very crucial to have ministers of telecom and posts like Minister Khan, but also women like you in the UN that are fighting for gender equality at the heart of the ICT sector. So thank you for all of the work that you're doing in that regard. And also the work that the ITU is doing on the WSIS SDG matrix, which really looks at how to localize and mainstream ICTs across all of the Sustainable Development Goals, taking into consideration gender equality in that regard. I'd like now just briefly to pass the floor before we go to the second sequence to Ms. Anusha Raman Khan, because I'm curious to hear from you specifically in your experience as minister, how you see digitalization empowering women and girls to be more constructive in reforming economies and society in Pakistan.
Thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm grateful for having me on the panel and wanting to know more about what's going on in Pakistan. And just to correct the record, I'm now a former minister. Just 5 days ago, our term completed the 5 years. And it's been a very interesting, a very, very productive run as the Minister for IT and Telecom. We were able to put in both the demand and the supply side together. As Doreen just mentioned, that the supply side is the core to everything else that gets built up eventually on the servicing side. So the supply chain of the connectivity, like connecting the unconnected, putting the broadband, taking the 3G, 4G connectivity to the far-flung areas, to bridge the digital divide, that's the key thing. We invested something like $600 million just in the last 5 years connecting the unconnected, and we connected 100 population village with no connectivity with a 3G network. So by 2018, all the projects will be done and completed. And this geographical map looks very interesting, that where people had basically no connectivity are suddenly finding 3G and a mobile handset to support it. But then what are they going to do with this connectivity? This connectivity is not really to stay on the social media platforms and to basically not really make the most out of it unless the governments intervene and start showing to the public that what is the supply side. After the supply side is given, what is the demand side that is going to change their life and bring the socio-economic development for them. So as we are treating with populations which have no connectivity, and we are treating both the males and females together, there is certainly an urgency to look into how the inclusiveness then gets in towards focusing on girls in particular, I would like to say. I actually make a distinction between women and girls, and I feel that there are about a large portion of the populations which are girls who are young, who are not even exposed to a basic computer, what to speak about knowing what to do with that computer. So the government of Pakistan, we started towards this all-inclusive society approach, and we started working on enhanced women empowerment through a well-structured, enabling environment that could guarantee their financial autonomy. And Pakistan is such a society that we could have places where it is very difficult for girls to leave their homes. And one particular emphasis that we added on there is to promote home-based job opportunities and mobile e-business opportunities through ICT tools that need little or no mobility for human resources. The objective was to foster an environment of skill development, providing them the technical skills that could enable them to earn a living from home. We started off with this project called ICT for Girls project, and we focused very well on the ICT for Girls project by introducing 3 key things. Number one, we ensured that the access to ICT infrastructure and ICT tools is provided to girls. Then we introduced a customized ICT education for special skill development. And thirdly, we provided access to mentorship and funding for potential startups and entrepreneurs. So we need to promote inclusiveness and empowerment of girls and women to enable them to contribute to and benefit from the value chain of ICTs. It's not just about putting an optic fiber cable and taking the last mile connectivity. It's about how this connectivity is going to translate into a financial empowerment, and the hand, which is a begging hand, converts into a giving hand. And this philosophy is very important to nurture self-respect in the girls. And I noticed that my first 15,000 girls who started on the program in 2015, for which the UN and ITU recognized me as a UN Global Achiever for this project and awarded me with this award, was that this project then started getting into the far-flung areas where girls had no access to ICTs, and access to an ICT infrastructure where coding and cloud computing was being taught in collaboration with Microsoft. So, and they were getting it free of cost. So the women empowerment centers where they were coming in to learn basic cooking and painting and embroidery skills, they suddenly had a women empowerment center which had a fantastic computer lab where teachers were trained by Microsoft and they were teaching them how to do coding. And this program was launched in 150 women empowerment centers where 15,000 girls were exposed to it. So 3 weeks ago on the Girls ICT for Girls Day, we had a program with the Prime Minister. We invited these girls from the 150 women empowerment centers, and the experience was fabulous. And you could go on YouTube and you can see the video ICT for Girls, and you will see that these girls who had no resource or source of earning any income, suddenly when they know coding or they know computing skills, either they started off with earning minimum $150. So this girl who was just perhaps doing nothing at home suddenly becomes a bread earner in the household, and she becomes important. And I was talking to a young girl who was mentioning that there is violence at homes and we have to look at about gender violence, and I said to her that as soon as this girl starts bringing in $150 in the house, nobody is going to do anything to her in terms of violence that we need to then curb. So the economic empowerment, the social feature of ICT actually brings a life to the girl. And we have to then start focusing on it in a broader way. So then I scaled up this program as minister to the ICT schools, the Islamabad schools, and mandated upon the school to start teaching the girl from 4 years of age and onwards. So this was the first time many girls just were exposed to a computer. So they had this fantastic computer lab, young teachers. We hired 206 teachers to start off with, who were fresh graduates and who were enthusiastic. The programs such as this do not come without passion. We will have to be completely committed towards the cause. And the passion to do it is what is going to drive the work to a sustainable and a conclusive model where we can reach out to the girls, teach them how to do coding, which is a universal language, enable them to earn from home, turn them into freelancers or otherwise, and then to make them useful members within their households, then makes them important in not only in their households, but in the society. And the children that they nurture eventually are going to be the children of the future. I mean, this is a complete value chain of ICTs that changes the face of the countries, that changes the face of the globe. So I would sort of urge all of us who are sitting here to look at the full value chain of ICTs, keeping girls in the focus. Because if we are going to just talk about women and digital divide, it's going to be a very broad area. If we can start focusing on areas of specific interest, develop cooperation and collaboration, we can have models like ICT for Girls that we have in Pakistan, which we can roll out to many other countries where it will be a positive impact for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you very much for underlining and highlighting the work that's going on at the national level, but also situating it in a very large value chain of ICTs. Listening to you, it's very clear to see how we can translate some of the broader recommendations that exist, for example, in the framework of the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development's working group on the digital gender divide, into concrete actions on the ground, both in policies and in programs.
Yeah, I just want to add that this program, we are training 150,000 girls every year. And Pakistan is a 200 plus million population, which is about 100 million plus are women. About half of it is girls. So you can imagine the kind of populations we will be attracting or targeting once we roll out these programs to such countries and sort of scale it up?
Thank you. We look forward to hearing about the feedback next year as it concerns the scaling up of this initiative and the implementation and continuous implementation of this work. Your expose feeds perfectly into the second segment that we will focus on as it concerns the digital divide, and more specifically the question I have to Mr. Alexander De Croo before he has to leave us, because as Deputy Prime Minister in May 2017, you launched the Digital Belgium Skills Fund to narrow the digital divide focused on the socially vulnerable. Can you tell us a little bit more about this initiative and its impact in bridging the digital divide, specifically as it concerns youth and girls and young women?
Well, we launched this basically after a conversation I've had with the different ministers of education we have in Belgium about the fact that we needed to upgrade our education system to the world of today. Unfortunately, the education world is notoriously slow in adapting. Now, there's a number of good reasons for that as well. I mean, I'm not just blaming the education system, but if you want to change things, it takes an incredible amount of time. And so we thought, okay, but then we can get again in discussions that will last for 5 years, and during the time of the discussions, nothing's going to change. So we thought, okay, maybe we should do things which are outside of the world of education, and also be more experimental. And so this fund is a fund that was created, subsidizes approximately 40 projects every year, 3 years in a row. The idea is to fund good ideas and to find out if they work. So instead of these endless discussions, let's just find out. And there is different approaches to the issue. Why do we work this way? First of all, because I don't know what the right approach will be. So we will probably finance a number of them that will notoriously fail, but some of them will be quite successful. Secondly, I think that there is not one answer to the issue. I think that there is going to be a number of different answers, number of different approaches. And we have been doing this now. Now it's the third year that we do this. What we see is that a number of the approaches that we subsidized are now being integrated by the classic education world. And so instead of being in those endless discussions, we have basically tried to prove that certain things work. And now we see that the classic world is saying, well, this thing is working. We will try to integrate it. You know that today we often say that we need to be more entrepreneurial and need to take more risks. I think that maybe as governments we need to do that as well, and need to invest in different approaches, knowing that, you know, some of them probably will not be very successful, but at least you know. At least you've tried it, and we see that this has created quite an interesting ecosystem of people often who are active in the startup world and people who are active in education. And I would think that today one of the more interesting domains in technology is that education tech world that is combining very different perspectives. I'm happy we did it this way. I am still a bit on my hunger on when the classic education world is going to adopt this at high speed. I remember that when I was in high school, somewhere end of the 80s, I learned how to code. When I go back to the same school today, they're not learning how to code. That is the world upside down. I mean, I would think that today it is actually much more useful for everyone to at least taste of what you could call computational thinking. Does that mean that you will become a coder afterwards? Probably not. But at least you know what it is, and at least you expose people to it. That, to finish, is the disadvantage of the approach we use with the Digital Skills Fund, which is outside of the schools, is that this attracts certain groups. Parents who know that it is important and send their kids there, which is good for you as a kid if your parents are aware, but not good when your parents are not. And the classic education system is this great equalizer. It exposes everyone to the same opportunities, which in our approach we do not have yet, but I hope it gets shifted soon.
Thank you for highlighting the need to put innovation and entrepreneurship also in the heart of our own governance structures, both in national governments, in international organizations, and in development cooperation, and also emphasizing the need for intersectionality between the tech world and the education systems. My next question is to Doreen Bogdan-Martin. Can you tell us, thank you very much for joining us today and for your insights. Can you tell us a little bit, in the framework of the digital divide, what we know about who is being left behind and where we should focus our efforts based on existing research undertaken by the ITU?
Sure, thank you. So I'm going to lay out some numbers. So currently today we have 3.9 billion people that are not currently using the internet, okay, 3.9 billion. We have 184 million fewer women than men that own a mobile phone. And when we look at women that are living in low and middle income countries, on average, they're 26% less likely to be using mobile internet. We also have 250 million fewer women than men online. And when we look globally, on average is about a 12% gap, fewer women than men online. That gap, of course, is worse in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. If we look specifically at LDCs, we see maybe on average 1 out of every 7 women is connected to the internet, compared to 1 out of every 5 men. So why? And that's what I'd like to just comment on briefly. Why is that the case today, if actually around the planet, pretty much from anywhere we are, we can have access to a 2G or a 3G signal, but yet half of the world is not connected. So what's the problem? There's several problems, and when it comes to gender issue, that problem is further complicated. Those problems center around cost. So the cost of service, often the cost of the devices are a big barrier to connectivity. The other issue is skills, and we've covered that in the first round of questions. Another area is safety. Women and girls often choose not to get online for fear of harassment, cyber violence, so safety is a big issue, and we need to really build a culture of cyber trust and confidence. And the other area, and Minister Khan alluded to that, is around how do we stimulate demand? Because the demand is not necessarily there, and that has to do with issues around content. So having relevant content in local languages. And if we think globally about the creation of apps, well, if the apps are created mostly by men and the apps are mostly in English, it's not a surprise that they may not necessarily meet local needs, particularly in rural areas. So those are some of the challenges. In terms of ways that we can overcome those challenges, there are a number of policy interventions that can be taken, and we've seen a number of them that have had an impact. Pakistan is a great example, and that's really thanks to your tremendous leadership. So policy interventions, having a budget connected to those policy interventions is also important, and also considering things like using universal service funds. UN Women announced some weeks ago at the Smart Africa conference, they had done a study together with the World Wide Web Foundation where they found that there were $408 million of unused universal service funds in sub-Saharan African countries. And then they were calculating what would happen if you actually took that unused money and spent it to try to really bridge the digital gap. So there are things that can work, and we've seen a number of great country examples, and perhaps later on I can tell you more about what we're trying to do in the context of equals to really make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doreen, for highlighting also the need for relevant content in local languages. One of the commitments that I know everybody on this panel has is to position young women and girls as producers of local content and not just consumers. So to no longer be passive as it concerns the ICT sector, but to really be positioned as leaders by producing locally relevant content in local languages destined to promote gender equality in all these fields. I'm I'm going to pass the floor now to Ms. Shweta Shah, who is one of these young women really promoting the production of local content. I'd like to hear a little bit from you because you were nominated by UN Women as a champion for change and have done some incredible work really putting women at the forefront through documentaries that you've made in the history of the ICT sector. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing to bridge the digital divide, both through these media advocacy campaigns, but also your work in the ICT sector?
Thank you. So did you know that only 17 women have won a Nobel Prize in physics, chemistry, or medicine since Marie Curie in 1903, compared to 572 men? Such huge disparities, such deep inequalities do not just happen by chance. Too many girls are held back by discrimination biases, social norms, and expectations that influence the quality of education that they receive and the subjects they study. Girls' underrepresentation in tech education is deep-rooted, and it puts a detrimental brake on progress towards sustainable development, which is what brings all of us here as well. Girls are often brought up to believe that tech is a masculine topic and that female ability in this field is inferior to that of males. This can undermine girls' intelligence, confidence, and willingness to engage in STEM subjects. For me, these statistics made me think, what can I do to change this? At first, I started organizing free public science lectures, inviting women engineers and technologists to talk about their research, and also to showcase to the world that we do have more Marie Curies. And now, I work at an education technology startup in London with my all-female team, where we are working on a platform that teaches coding to girls. And we want to engage girls in creative storytelling and then show them that coding is not difficult and it's not just for boys. We carried out over 12 months of research, interviewing hundreds of students between the ages of 8 to 13, and immersed ourselves in their culture. We analyzed the most popular books, movies, and cartoons that both boys and girls subscribe to, so that we could come up with a solution that appeals to both genders. And the result was Erase All Kittens. It's a platform game that has been played in over 100 countries by 130,000 players. 60% of our players are girls. And the way the game works, it's been inspired by Mario. And as girls play the game, they can build and fix different levels within the game in a controlled environment, thus hacking into the game and learning to write actual HTML syntax. The result that we got out of this was that it showcased that girls were interested in learning how to code after they've played the game. A lot of school teachers also had an innovation that they could bring into the classroom and turn a subject that sometimes can come across as dry, especially for 8-year-olds, and turned it into something fun. So it teaches them professional languages all through story-driven gameplay. What is story-driven gameplay? For us, it is a half mermaid, half unicorn called Tarquin Glitterquiff, who is one of our characters who teaches the concepts of entrepreneurism to kids. And our goal is to completely transform how girls perceive coding and to empower them with real-world skills. In this room, there are leaders from policy, business, and education. Collectively, we have the power to make a real difference. So as we are talking about technology, I thought I would channel BuzzFeed and give a list of 4 ways to crack inequality in tech. Concrete actions that we can all take away after listening to this panel and try and implement them within our local communities. First, quality education. Let us fix the shortage of ICT teachers and start including current women engineers and scientists in local school textbooks and showcasing the work that they are doing. Mentoring. I invite businesses and corporates to adopt a local school and to invite girls and host them to your company to show technology in action and actually show them how technology works and what you can do with the skills that you've learned. Culture. I encourage women scientists and engineers in the room to go out and start talking to young girls, be their role models, because we do need to show that, yes, Marie Curie did a great job, but there are more Marie Curies in the world, and that we can win a Nobel Prize if we wanted to. And to parents, Buy your kids engineering and science kits and run experiments with them. Parents are children's biggest role models when they're growing up. And if they can see you solve a challenge with them, they would be encouraged to also explore opportunities within tech. And let's all erase more kittens. Girls and women are key players to shape solutions for our future. So help us make it Agenda Now instead of Agenda 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. And above all, these very concrete solutions. You underlined that, there's Marie Curie, but there are also these other models, and I would definitely underline that both you and Latifa are two exemplary models of young women in the ICT sector right now around the world. And we're very happy that you can join us on this platform to highlight the work that you have been doing. Thank you also for those very concrete recommendations, which when I wrap up the session, we will take into consideration going forward as how to work together in a multi-stakeholder way to make women and girls in digitalization a reality. I would like to now shift over to the third segment of our conversation, which will look at lessons learned from initiatives on gender equality within the digital sector in the EU and elsewhere, and pass the floor to Mr. Joachim Reiter. You are External Affairs Director at Vodafone, but until recently, as I mentioned in my introduction, were an Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. You were also previously Deputy Director General of the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So you bring to this conversation a range of experience at the intersection of international development, national governance, and the private sector. In your opinion, what is the role of multi-stakeholder cooperation in promoting gender equality within the digital sector and the participation of young girls and women in digitalization more specifically?
Thanks a lot. And if you don't mind, I'll also pick up some of the points that have been made in the panel. So if I summarize in terms of what we are doing in Vodafone and where we partner with a number of organizations upon which we have learned a lot, we work basically in 5 areas, if I had to summarize it. One was the connectivity angle that we all referred to, the digital gap that exists on a clear gender basis. Part of that solution must be tackling rural coverage. As we all know, poverty is more prevalent in rural communities, and women tend to be more stuck, if I can put it like that, in rural communities. And on top of it, we have an unsustainable urbanization problem in many countries. So we have all the incentive to make sure that the benefits of ICT reaches everyone in the rural countryside. For that, private sector, including companies like Vodafone, are not going to be able to do it by themselves. It really requires collaboration with governments and the right policy framework in mind. Second point, services. Companies in general have not been good enough, because it's not a government solution. It's the startup, small and medium-sized, plus large corporation solution of providing the services that tailor for all the different segments that we're aiming at. So to give you a concrete example, we have committed, out of the 184 unconnected women, the gap between men and women in terms of the lack of access to mobile, we have committed in mobile phone that we will cover 50 million out of the 184. And we will do that not only through the connectivity issue, but actually being much more forthcoming and identifying specific local content services targeted for this segment, which is women. And one of them, of course, is, for example, using the mobile payment platform, M-Pesa, we're doing to have crowdfunding for small and medium-sized women entrepreneurs, but as well as health savings platforms, and a number of other things. So it will be a number of things where companies actually have to be better at understanding this segment and capturing it, because it makes absolutely no sense, even from a commercial point of view, not to target this segment. Now, third thing, we talked about jobs. So we launched in March here in Brussels. Across our footprint, we will help 10 million young people find their way into digital employments. Part of that is absolutely, like the Deputy Prime Minister said, de-dramatizing what we call about digital jobs. So what we have done, work with psychologists to create a psychological metric that anyone can put in, and then that psychological metric will tell you which type of digital jobs will fit for you. Then you will have training courses that are available online, and you will be able to find any job in any of the territories that we exist in that area. So to give you a concrete example, I should not be in external affairs. I'm a game tester. So it's a fun thing to do. I recommend everyone who never thought about digital jobs, because actually what you realize is that we are very focused on one narrow set, which is the coding, which is very important. But there is a vast majority of different types of jobs in the digital economy that needs to be filled, many of which by the way, would be super interesting for people like myself who's not particularly interested in tech, to be honest. And there are a lot of digital jobs which are not super tech savvy. But we need to de-dramatize what is digital jobs and what are the booming jobs out there. Fourth, education. Now here's the thing that Vodafone really cannot do alone. We're partnering with education systems in a number of African countries, 5 to be specific, and we're currently running an education platform together with the ministries of education in those countries for 500,000 learners. Our objective is to provide primary and secondary education in Africa for 5 million African children, plus 3 million refugees, both of which will be targeted heavily for girls. So this is what we're trying to do. That requires an enormous partnership with local authorities, municipal and state level, as well as donor organizations and non-governmental organizations, including, by the way, teachers' unions. Teachers, in the end, the education system, when they're broken, cannot be solved by companies coming in and creating a platform where students can sort of download free material, which we do, but it actually also requires emancipating the teachers to provide better and more updated learning to their kids. A final thing that we do is health. So we're running a big maternity program in Tanzania. We provide maternity health for 650,000 Tanzanian women. And the reason is because we figured out that actually in Tanzania that there was a huge problem with fistula. So women in the rural countryside tend not to get medical assistance, including by the donor facilities, donor-funded facilities in Dar es Salaam. Why? Because A, they don't know about it, B, they have no means to get to those facilities. So what we created was a Uber ambulance system. So anyone can send us an SMS. We will send a taxi out to any village and pull them into the facilities that donors have generously contributed with. And that's where we work with USAID, and USAID put 80 million into a big program for health, and we're making sure that the women can access the health is there. So all of those are actually collaborative projects. None of them we can do alone. And I think part of the multi-stakeholder approach is understanding each actor's niche. You know, we're a telco, we're a digital company. We're not experts in education. We're not experts in maternal health, which means that the content for educational platforms or for health programs will have to come with someone else. That's why we always partner with NGOs that are experts in this area, as well as with ministries. Now, I must say one of the big challenges in all of this, to be perfectly honest, is the different cultures that is meeting once you sit down. So to give you a concrete example, as Vodafone, based on our own experience, we work very well with NGOs. We work really well with private foundations like Gates. We tend not to work very well with donors. And there are a number of reasons for that. One is that when you enter into partnership, you sit shoulder by shoulder and you share the accountability and the need to progress the program. So it's not one paying money into a fund that someone then taps into, but you actually share a collective responsibility. The second thing is the private sector works at much higher speed. So if we go in with very little money and see if we can scale it up, very much like a startup model. And that model sometimes does not work for significant donors that expect us to come in and request 50 million when we actually just want 150 to kick it off. And 150,000, sorry. So we work very small and then scale up super fast through experiment. And that is a very difficult model sometimes to fit in, say, traditional clearance process of donors, or for that matter, result-based management. Because we will know the results over 3 to 5 years. We will not know it by year 1. And we will adapt the model on a continuous basis, just as startups are doing. So we have found that the multi-stakeholder approach works really well, but you have to be super selective about your partners. They have to share your vision. They have to share your working methodology. Otherwise, it does not work. It will just become highly bureaucratic.
Thank you very much for that overview, and also for providing this perspective from the private sector and underlining the need for each partner to identify really their respective niche in order for us to work successfully together. Karine Jamtin,
yes.
I'd love to hear a little bit from you, also reflecting on what Mr. Ryder has just said, as it concerns the role that SIDA plays as a cooperation agency in closing the gender digital divide, and what role you see for SIDA in Sweden in the normative discussion on the digital divide that could be used as best practices going forward.
We could have many, on the last part of your question, I would just like to say that we could have many roles there, but I think that one important role for us would actually be to support global women's organizations, to give them the possibility of having a voice in different kinds of rooms and settings at global level to provide the gender perspective of different kinds of challenges in this field. But we can also support other groups in different ways. As an agency, we work with, I would like to comment on what Joachim said. We also work well with different partners, and I can recognize, and I do recognize what you said with I wouldn't say problems, but challenges with meetings between agencies, government-run development agencies and the private sectors. Sometimes it runs very smoothly and we find common language and common pace in development of projects. Sometimes we have to see that we have different ways of working. And I think that one important way of bridging that, it might sound simple, but that is to meet and greet and talk. Because there is, I find nowadays anyway, a will from both sides to really bridge this gap between private sector and government agencies. It's especially important that is done in areas like this. The digital divide is something which has to be, or the digital challenge rather, to roll out digitalization in the South, in the global South, in different ways, has to be done in collaboration between different partners. Public partners, civil society, and the private sector. And thus we have to work together. It's like the electrification sector or building roads or whatever. We have to work together in different ways. This is an area which is improving, but we have to work a bit longer actually to reach all the way. We work, just two other reflections. We work with access, capacity building, but also in other ways. Access is about costs, which was mentioned before from several people. Education and capacity building, again, I would say that one of our important pluses is that we can support different kinds of organizations, women's organizations, organizations for girls, students' organizations, etc., to make it possible for them. And then we have a biannual event called the Stockholm Internet Forum, which is a meeting place which really tackles access to internet in a free and fair way in different ways. Last year it was on access and power, and it always has gender equality as a theme through it, and we will continue that talk next year. That is really a norm-setting possibility.
Thank you very much for playing such a crucial role in facilitating the conversation around these questions of internet governance and internet access at the Cooperation Agency, and for setting these normative standards. Really briefly, before we move on to the closing segment, I would like to just pass the floor to Anusha Raman-Khan, and then afterwards briefly Doreen Bogdan-Martin, before passing the floor to the chair. Anusha, can you just tell us briefly how you address possible financial limitations in the work that you've done? Our colleague from the private sector, Mr. Reiter, underlined the different kinds of scaling opportunities of financial support. How have you, in your experience, dealt with possible financial limitations in the work that you've been doing in Pakistan?
I mean, essentially, we use the Universal Services Fund and the Research and Development Fund, which the governments, most governments in the world collect from the telecom sector. And it was a question of channelizing that funding for the most essential side, which is the demand side. What was happening earlier on was that countries were rolling out the infrastructure. And after the infrastructure is rolled out, we have to intervene into the different demand sides like commerce, education, health, agriculture, so on and so forth. So I started calling Ministry of IT as Ministry of Disruption, because we were entering all other ministries through disruption. So when we would say, why is Ministry of Commerce not doing e-commerce? They would say, e-commerce is the job of Ministry of IT. When I started asking Education Ministry, why are you not rolling out computers and teaching coding and cloud computing, etc., etc., and they would say, e-education is probably the job of Ministry of IT. And then we started talking to health and agriculture and other ministries, and we realized that the E or the M part is essentially Ministry of IT being the enabler, has to play some kind of a proactive role. So we started many different projects. So for commerce, we started the e-commerce portal, which is literally coming online, made in Pakistan now in the next week or so. Then we started the ICT for Girls program. We started the DigiSkills program, training 1 million children online. So it is for young and for young at heart. So that 1 million DigiSkills program actually is available for everyone in the world who wants to become a freelancer and gets into journalism. I mean, it's an opportunity for journalists, for doctors, for chartered accountants, or for girls who are just learning how to do coding. Then we got into agriculture and so on and so forth. So the private sector came out with us, and then we set up the incubation centers across 5 across the country, putting up a full package for the startups and incubatees in the IT sector, giving them opportunities and giving benefits from the tech side of it. But then the private sector came out. I think this is one thing that we did, which Pakistan started, was putting as an RFP model, request for proposals, allocating the funding and inviting the whole world to come and do the work. So it's not really a partnership per se, it's a funding provided by the government from the Universal Services Fund or the Research or Development Fund, making it available for the private sector. So the Doreen pointed out that there is so much funding available, but people are not using it. I met a minister three years ago, and he said that in our country, the law is that if the USF funding is not used for 3 years, it will lapse. Now, unfortunately, in many countries, the USF funding is being used to cover the budget deficit, which has not happened in Pakistan. So when I became the minister, my target was to actually spend the money on the underserved, unserved areas, and both on supply and demand side. So we could manage to commit $600 million and then spending more. We have another, I think, equal amount sitting in the banks. Now, what the private sector does, the private sector does not come forward by itself. They are very scared of trying out new avenues where there is a fear of failing the project. When the government comes in and commits to the funding, like startups, incubation, nurturing the venture capital funds, etc., then the private sector is a little bit more sort of attracted to the new areas. And then once they see that there is a possibility or a potential, then they start putting in their own funding in the sector. So like in e-commerce, we have small pockets of funding coming from the private sector, but when then so much work is being done and the government is doing it, then players like Alibaba become interested, and then they come to the country. So my public-private partnership and the usage of USF funding and Research and Development Fund, which I called IGNITE, is that we need to channelize the funding to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. No government, especially in developing countries, will have the funding when they have a requirement for health, education, food, clean water, etc., to allocate a huge amount of funding for technology. We will need to channelize the existing funding and see how the progression enables the governments to allocate more funding going forward in their budgets.
Thank you very much for that overview. Before passing the floor to Laura Borisova, I would just be interested, Doreen, to hear from you just in 2 or 3 sentences based on the experience in the ITU. Despite the growing number of initiatives to bridge the digital divide and address gender barriers, this gender gap persists. In your opinion, what do we need to do differently?
So we need to do things differently, just to pick up on the last thing you mentioned, and that's why we have launched as a response a global partnership, a multi-stakeholder global partnership called Equals, and it's all about bridging the digital gender gap. We think we need to take a holistic approach, not just one part of the problem, but the whole problem, and we've divided our work in 3 coalitions: Access, led by GSMA, Skills, led by Germany and UNESCO, and Leadership, which is led by ITC and really looks at the future entrepreneurs. We have a cross-cutting track on research. Evidence-based is key, and we need to have the data. We need to have sex disaggregated data, which is absolutely key. And so we have some 29 universities working on the research side. We would invite all of you to join us, because we think that to solve this problem, we really do all need to work together. And what Joaquin was saying, we all don't have expertise in every area, so it's through a global multi-stakeholder partnership that we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On that note, I'd like to pass the floor to Laura Borisova to talk a little bit about the the Women in Digital strategy that the European Commission has adopted alongside the Digital for Development, mainstreaming digital technologies and services into EU development policy. Can you tell us a little bit about this strategy and its importance in putting women and girls at the forefront of digitalization?
Sasha, thank you so much. Already in my introductory remarks, indeed, I noted down some of the ideas of this strategy. So I'll just basically refer to the main 3 pillars that we have in this strategy that was announced by my commissioner on the 8th of March. So we have first, indeed, this very important pillar, which is fighting stereotypes, as I've explained with the different initiatives there. We have that the definite and very important accent and focus on skills, and I found this panel very, very enriching. But as a red thread, actually, we had all the panelists indeed referring to the importance of skills. And there I refer to the Code Week, the Digital Opportunity Scheme. I didn't mention that, which of course could potentially also target girls, not just boys. And girls and boys not in ICT, but indeed encouraging them to go into the ICT area, the Girls in ICT initiative in general. And then the third pillar, which for us is indeed the women entrepreneurship and the various initiatives that we've launched in this respect. I would just basically invite warmly everyone here in the room, and of course the panelists, if they can make it to our big event on the 19th of June, Digital for Her event, which indeed is going to look at all these areas and basically will take all these initiatives to something much more concrete and describe how we can implement all this, again, acting together, as I've underlined in my introduction. If you allow me, maybe a few words on the Digital for Development strategy that actually the European Commission announced last year. I think we have advanced in the implementation of that one. Only recently, a few weeks ago, there was a very important meeting of the European Commission, the whole College of Commissioners, with the African Union Commission, indeed discussing ways to, and I absolutely agree with what the Vice Deputy Prime Minister De Croo actually said on the new partnership that we have, especially with Africa. So we have a new action plan that we need to look at, with a couple of, again, very important initiatives there. For instance, the creation of a joint digital task force with the African Union Commission, the exchanges of training programs, actually, also, by the way, with bilateral countries, the development, again, of digital skills through the creation of digital jobs coalitions in Africa. That's something that works extremely well in the European Union, and we very much plead and work towards a closer cooperation and closer work together, again, of all these coalitions. Investment and supporting better, especially in Africa, of the e-identity, and unfortunately we don't have time, but I can describe a couple of initiatives we have there, including, by the way, on elections, registers, but also initiatives in the area of e-health, agriculture, education, of course. Mr. Reiter mentioned that. Work much more intensively with the startups, and of course, all this, again, as a very strong signal of the mainstreaming that we want to get to in our Digital for Development policy of the general objective, indeed, of development, the partnership, and of course, again, the accent on girls and women. I'll stop here.
Thank you for that overview. I would like, based on what you have said, to close the session just by providing some concrete recommendations and salient points that have been said by the respective panelists, who I thank for their very pertinent contributions. First, to harness the potential of ICTs to create jobs for young people and empower women, we need to ensure affordable access, and we need to address barriers to use by encouraging digital literacy, digital skills, and confidence. To address the gender divide, we need quality education, encourage the development of sex disaggregated data on internet access and use, ensure relevant content, applications, and services, and position young women and girls as not only consumers but also producers of digital content. We need to counter stereotypes and promote role models of young girls and women online. based on lessons learned from initiatives on gender equality within the digital sector in the European Union and elsewhere, we need to make sure that we're integrating a gender perspective in strategies, policies, plans, and budgets, but also in our approach to multi-stakeholder cooperation with the private sector. And we need to continue to ensure platforms for exchange of good practices like this one. And in this regard, I'd like to thank once again DG Connect and Lars-Erik Forsberg and Gérard Galère for their work in making sure that this platform for a conversation that is part of an ongoing conversation happens in the framework of the EU Development Days. But you guys cannot leave until we all join the She Is We campaign. So before you all get up and get another cup of coffee, could we all stand up very quickly and say, in the framework of She Is We, which is the campaign for the European Development Days, she is digital, we are empowered. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. She is digital, we are empowered. So thank you very much. We hope that there will be a conversation bilaterally with you in the audience and the panelists. Thank you to the panelists for their brilliant contributions, and may this be the beginning of an ongoing conversation in this regard with all of us around the table. Thank you and have a great afternoon in beautiful Brussels.